Do. Hello. All right. So I feel like I generally have lots of content to go over with people, and I just like have been trying to channel the willpower and general motivation to do this. I have time right now, and I need to use it while I still have it. But on that end, I've finally got a topic that I wanted to go into. So, all right, I talked about a little bit about oligarchy and how it's essentially helping alongside capitalism to destroy our country, and they kind of reinforce each other, right? So you have capitalism being used as a means to, it's like a, you could think of it maybe a software within the program of society, and it's allowing us to accomplish a particular goal. And in this case, it's like trade and acquisition, and also in some ways, it's helping to like advance technology and through essentially capitalism is powered off of a lot of competition and competitiveness, and tends to kind of create conflict. So I created a map in my head of how I wanted to talk about all this stuff, and it's on this cute little thing. Oh, well, not that side, but it's on this cute little board here. So I'm going to go down it just because I want to be a little more structured in how I go through this. So what I'm going to talk about is generally the need for separation of corporation and state. Now we're supposed to have anyway, a separation between church and state. Now the reason we had a separation of church and state is that we do not believe that these things are going to work together in service to the liberties and beliefs that we believe all human beings should have. We don't feel like we want to have a country that's a theocracy, at least at the inception of it. I don't think that was the case. Currently, there are factions of Americans who do seem to favor theocracy, like Mike Pence and others of his sort, his ilk. And there are people who I think genuinely want this, and they don't know that they probably shouldn't want this. And it's also contrary to it's not only contrary to the Constitution in a lot of ways, but it's just contrary to like the American experiment as a democratic republic. But I mean, it's maybe possible to accomplish some kind of democratic republic theocracy, but I don't think you would want that. It's pretty icky. But that's another video. Around 2 minutes. So yeah, we need to achieve essentially a separation of corporation and state for the same reasons we need a separation of church and state. Essentially, church will bring in like an obsession, I'll argue, an unhealthy obsession with the afterlife into the current life and impose all its values upon society, contrary to majority of rational claims and arguments and science. So like if we're thinking about how to go about X, Y, or Z for the sake of humanity, we're now also confounding that by adding in things that we cannot falsify or verify. And that doesn't really technically matter what religion you pick, more or less, but it just tends to be the case that the big three are the ones that tend to really try to push the whole the move towards theocracy, or the merging of church and state tends to be usually, well, I mean, Abrahamic faiths, I think, tend to have this desire, I think, with it built into them, where they want to like merge with the state. And that's where you see like people trying to bring Bibles and such into education, and in the same venue as science, which is falsifiable and you can prove. They're trying to bring in something that's like completely not like anti-scientific and merge the two as if they're like on the same level. Not good. So this is a problem. We don't want to have students believe in like things that are contrary, like we have no significant evidence in favor of scientifically. And it's okay to harbor like personal beliefs, but I mean, there's little pockets within like the academic space to explore personal beliefs, but to teach creationism alongside fucking evolution, like it's a slap in the face to Charles Darwin and all science everywhere, in my opinion. So, all right. So why do we need switching from essentially religion pollutes government. We're going to switch into corporation pollutes government. Corporations are kind of like not always a thing in the conventional sense. Now, what do I mean by that? For a long time, corporations had shelf life, so they weren't immortal, just like ourselves aren't immortal for the same reason, essentially, cancer. And then also, they had high taxes levied upon them. So like they were taxed at a high threshold to prevent like their power and influence becoming a threat to government and social wealth, like health. Now, this is my paraphrasing of things I've learned through history and philosophy and other classes, and I'm just distilling it again for the sake of brevity. Rather than having to go back and cite everything, I'm willing to try and find these things if somebody brings up something in the comments or something like that. But for now, just like, yeah, just let's finish this. So corporations essentially originally had limits placed upon them, and these limits were slowly eroded at an earlier time period, to the point where we had monopolies and trusts and stuff, like huge, like super corporations working together who had like almost immeasurable power. Now, I liken this because I like to map a lot of things onto biology or borrow concepts within biology for like conceptual stuff, because I feel like science and philosophy can borrow that kind of useful tools, I suppose, right? Conceptual tools. And so, in a lot of ways, it's an immortal corporation that has low taxes upon it has the potential, especially over time, to grow uncontrollably powerful and then start to subvert its will, or start to, what's the word I want to use? To enforce its will upon the national government, which is supposed to be representing the normal people, common people in general who vote and who their interests. So like, make sure that their life quality is good. And I want to go into detail on what I think a good government is, very briefly, because I feel like a lot of people have different attitudes about what a government is and what it should do. I mean, like, for some people, it sounds almost like they're describing like North Korea when they talk about they want small government, they want no government intervention, or like some seem like either like I've heard examples of like hyper patriotism, so that I would liken that to North Korea, and I've heard examples that sound hyper corporatist or like heavily oligarchical, and I would liken that to like the sci-fi movie Blade Runner, in which pretty much the entire world is run by corporations, like super powerful corporations, and they make the rules. For the same reasons, I don't want religion to decide the fate of humanity and be the compass by which we guide society, is the same reason that I don't want corporations to have the compass to guide society, especially under capitalism, because capitalism does not have a moral compass. I assure you of this. And you can look throughout history to verify why that is the case. Look at like a whole bunch of places, but I would especially emphasize perfect example of would be like Chile or Honduras, because these countries had like more socialist nature to them. And when it, like, for example, I recall the history of Salvador Allende, and he was a democratically elected socialist, and what did the capitalist superpower adjacent to, like not far from him, do to what's technically the world's, Latin America's oldest democracy? They fucked them over, and they basically empowered the people who were, like, they helped the people stage a coup, the military stage a coup against this guy who was democratically elected. They could have voted him out if they didn't want him, and we went over this in the class I'd been in part of at my university. But that aside, we have a problem where corporations will do the same kind of pollution to things that are in the public's interests, and also not only pervert things that, like, policies that are in the public's interest, but pervert the perception of what's in the public interest as a whole. And so I'm going to get into that on each level of just like what capitalism's fucking us over and like how. But I just want to reiterate why this is basically, corporation and state is essentially as bad as church and state being fused. And our lack of, like, we can think not doing anything, or like if we leave it alone, a lot of people will think, oh, it'll be fine, just like stop here. But the problem is capitalism doesn't know how to stop in the same way a cancer cell does not know how to stop. It will continue and self-perpetuate over and over again in order to amass resources and power. In the same way a tumor or like a fucking cancerous growth will draw resources that the rest of the body needs to it for its like own suicidal mission, capitalism functions, in my opinion, in the same fashion. It will draw resources from the country that could be used for other good things that are arguably necessary things to advancing the welfare of humanity, of the society itself, whether it be the nation itself or fucking the entire planet, arguably. Hence, we have islands of plastic in the ocean. We have don't have renewable energy widespread like we should. And also, this is an homage to Earth Day, because Earth Day is passing around. And we just do so many things that are, like, should be, like, to anybody who has any sense, should be obviously bad for, like, everybody, or majority of people, but people don't see it that way. And the reason they don't see it that way is because under capitalism, we've kind of, like, we've not only allowed capitalism to influence our society economically, we've allowed capitalism to influence like the zeitgeist of American society, and it's been doing this for like a long time. That's why we had previous presidents like FDR who tried to like roll out counter reforms, and we had fucking socialist and left-wing movements and the 1960s to like try and fight back a lot of these forces. But unfortunately, capitalism pairs really well because it does in structure. If I were to describe how I perceive capitalism, it likes to stratify things in a hierarchy that will grow over time. And so there needs to be, it's like a pyramid, pyramid scheme. There has to be a base of people from which it is drawing most of the resources from, but those resources are not going necessarily to where they need to be going. And capitalism as a software or a like biological entity, if you want to imagine it that way, starts to go rogue and just starts to like reprogram the system, which is supposed to be like, in my opinion, for a good government, is to protect the citizens and society from enemies, foreign and domestic, that would see the society destroyed for the sake of destruction, for greed and selfish gain or something like that. And it's also not only just to protect us from like wanton violence and anarchy and like people behaving like psychopathically or like sociopathically, but it's also meant to, in my opinion, be a tool that guides the society in a better direction towards higher quality of life. Now, this is a huge difference, I think, from a lot of people, because I meet lots of more conservative thinkers who want to believe that the government's only role is to protect its citizens, and it's usually in a very vague sense. How they want to protect their citizens is usually like some kind of military or like police state type thing that's in their mind, or they don't believe in like having a private police state, or they don't believe having a public police state. That libertarians usually like go this route. They believe in having like a private police state where they maybe like corporations of some kind that will you pay for protection, I guess. There's lots of weird iterations of this I've visited with different people I've talked to, and even amongst people I'm friends with. So we're either doing it seriously because I meet some people that I know I'm cool with, generally speaking, that are pretty libertarian. They're less toxically so than maybe some people I've come across, but still, I mean, people are pretty like, I know people are neoliberal from like high school, from like all different walks of life that I've ventured. I've met plenty of like all the stuff. I've met white supremacists and like interacted with them for years and talked to them about like what their views were and tried to see if there was like an innate part of who they were, or if I could maybe change their opinion over time. Spoiler alert, I wasn't able to really change their opinion, I don't think. But hey, I learned a lot. But in this sense, capitalism pairs well with things that want to discriminate and kind of power imbalances. It wants there to be an imbalance in power. If I was to reify or give it a personality to capitalism, it's something that, like, on a psychic level or whatever you want to call it, wants to to break the balance of power down, and it will trend, in my opinion, if you look at throughout history and other places, there's capitalism. It tends to exacerbate oligarchy or concentrations of power, and it can be a tool that I told in the previous video about a friend of mine who's claimed that their ancestor was executed by the local warlord or king or whoever it was because he had achieved so much wealth that he became an inherent threat to the person who's the ruling government of the place, right? And so that person was executed. And I mean, this is a logical conclusion if you think about what people who have enough money and resources can do to a government. Now, I mean, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a democracy, although I think it's the most toxic to a democracy, but they can do it in pretty much any form of government. Whether it's a monarchy, you have a king, one of the noble people gets rich enough, they can become the king. They can like render the king powerless, essentially. And this works for like a number of other forms of government, and it's just like, I think, a pathology of government in a way that capitalism kind of like lends itself to. It's like if somebody smokes, it's like cigarette smoke. If you want to like envision the kind of health threat it is to a government. It creates a condition that is toxic enough or acidic enough to erode the natural defenses of the organism that is government and make it vulnerable to things that will make it like create a disease within it, a pathology. And so we're moving down the list. We need separation of corporation and state. And we went through what I was talking about for government being, and what I think is an ideal government, or a more ideal government than what we're like generally conception of it is. And a lot of people don't really I want to get people to flesh out what they mean when they talk about government, and like people's definitions to like be traded, because like if you really think about this stuff and you compare like an anarchist's attitude about government versus like some other person's attitude, you start to really be able to tease out like, do I really like, one, is this realistic? Is this something that will like really instantiate itself within reality given how our current society is ordered? And then two, you get to see like, are these people doing this for like extremely selfish reasons? Could it be that this person's rich and they just want to protect their riches and or exploit other people so they can get more rich? Jeff Bezos? Maybe. So there's that. But going down, separation of corporation state. Corporations require or like make use of capitalism, and capitalism as a like psychic entity of sorts, as a ideology, kind of slowly corrupts the society, in my opinion, as well. So not only is capitalism able to erode through policy and things that are in favor of like profit, because as I said in the previous video, the main end goal, the end good of capitalism is profit and generating more capital. So I mean, this is in restricted sense useful, in the same way like nuclear energy in a restricted sense is useful, or like other things that are like potentially destructive, if you use them in just the right way, they can be useful. But capitalism doesn't like it as a thing that interacts with groups of humans and not just individual humans. I'm gonna think on the group level. I've seen in history instances where it seems to have like slowly eroded labor rights have been eroded. Like they had to create a lot of protections against capitalism in its original like more pure forms, and that's where you get the concept of crony capitalism, or like the other versions of capitalism, whether they are right. But what we generally like, things I think people attribute to, say, crony capitalism are things that are actually, I think, inherent within, and the seeds of them are inherent within just general capitalism as it is. And people will go along and cite all the flaws with, say something like communism, which is, to be fair, like capitalism had a way longer run than communism had, and I'm not a communist, but to be fair, they didn't have as much time, and also communism was always at odds, like was never allowed to evolve in a vacuum of sorts, or a relative vacuum of like isolation for a long enough period. So there's lots of confounding factors, and there's just always like the Cold War and that kind of thing created a like volatile relationship that even if they were able to even if they were able to get some good out of the emerging idea of whatever communism was supposed to be, it was always being assailed by capitalism, which is seeking to like break down power balance and like skew these things in favor of a few select elites. And so this is why on the conceptual level, I think of capitalism as being a relatively dangerous dangerous system of economic, or how do I order it, or how do I want to say it? I look at capitalism as a dangerous economic tool and system to have your government be in service to. There we go. That's how I would put it. With that in mind, I mean, I'm not going to discount all the value of capitalism. It has some value. It's just like a lot of negatives that go along with it and that need to be checked. But for all intents and purposes, you do not want your government to run on the software of capitalism. It's like running on old school Internet Explorer, which has all these vulnerabilities to it and can be exploited by hackers. Like, it's designed to just like, it will let you surf the internet, but it will not do so in the desired way. It'll be slow, it'll be vulnerable to attack, it'll have lots of holes that should be patched given the time we've had to work on these kind of things. And what's frustrating is a lot of the answers to restraining it are available and like they're in circulation, but people refuse to enact them because capitalism has done such a good job of switching over to the next level of influence that capitalism has. Going beyond policy, capitalism psychologically has transformed society and eroded what would ordinarily have been ethics and values about humanity and common good to being about like excessive individualism and kind of selfishness and greed and like pitting one person against another or groups of people against each other when a lot of us would be served by the same common ends. Like, if we have like one of the policies I think would be very productive, and one thing that we probably need is like single payer healthcare, right? And capitalism generally doesn't want to be like, the people who champion capitalism generally do not want to champion single payer healthcare. And it actually makes, I can make a capitalist argument for single payer healthcare. I don't like having to do that because it's like trying to argue from a cannibal's perspective why he shouldn't eat you, right? It's like I don't taste that good, but that's the wrong mindset to begin with. But yeah, I'd rather not use the capitalist argument, which would essentially be like, oh, if you give people single payer healthcare, it will improve their productivity and you'll have more reliable workers, thus you can generate more profit, But in the real scope of things, we need single payer healthcare not because it will generate more profit, but because it is an inherent good for the society as a whole, and it's an inherent good for humanity as a whole, generally speaking, which I think is like covers a lot of bases. That should be enough. It should be, but the people who have power generally have gotten it via the capitalist route. And they often are the ones who are championing and defending capitalism, and whether it be the classic capitalism or slight reforms to capitalism. And this needs to change in order for us to transcend the coming like apocalypse, basically. Like, capitalism has moved in such a way that at the psychological level, people are losing empathy for each other. People who we used to feel pity for being in a poor position. And I remember seeing this in a video. I forget, I would have referenced them if I can remember what it was. But if I can find it, I'll put them. I like to give people credit if I can. But in a video, I remember watching a documentary where there's I think, English guy who was essentially stating that we have turned poverty into a moral issue, as it's like a flaw of character to be poor. It's like you deserve to be poor. It's not a consequence of circumstances anymore. And so why is this person homeless on the streets? And people will be like, oh, he did drugs or he did X, Y, or Z. And I mean, that's of course, I'm sure, a factor. But why did this person do drugs? Why did this person feel the need to resort to a substance to feel that they need that to survive, or that that's better than like whatever they were doing normally. It's usually because, in my opinion, and I'm pretty sure I can find evidence to support this, their life circumstances put them in a bad place, or they were put in a position that they had little exposure to things or avenues to help them navigate things like mental illness or mental health, and they didn't have, even if they didn't have these initial problems, they might have developed them over time through struggling in the system of capitalism. Because when you have to work several jobs and you get like almost no sleep, of course it's gonna fuck with your mental health, right? And this is getting near 30 minutes. I'll try to wrap it up. But yes, there's a number of confounding factors that make it really difficult. And I meet people who are like, that doesn't prove that capitalism is bad. I'm like, it kind of generally does. The evidence inductively should be strong enough to be like, yeah, like we should not organize our society in service to capitalist like goals and aims and spirit. Like it is not designed to make you empathetic for your fellow human beings. It champions like charity as a solution for like serious social ills, when it's giving charity for problems that it has helped create in the first place. If we didn't like exploit certain countries or destabilize certain countries, then we wouldn't need to go. We wouldn't have to have as many refugees and take them in. We would have to give charities to people. We could just prevent the problem from the outset. But capitalism does not like doing that because it is counter to what capitalism, like as a psychic entity, if we would talk about it, or conceptual thing, wants to do. It wants to restructure society in a hierarchy with a few in power at the top and most of the people at the bottom like in like relative desperation and poverty. And if you look at like what like the state of oil right now, I think is a perfect example. Like we have to bail out the oil industry. How absurd is it that people are like our president of all people, after we've been in a war in a country that did not invade us for like almost 2 decades, it's overwhelmingly absurd that we should bail out an industry that has helped to impoverish our country in many ways and enrich a very small group within our country, usually the oligarchs, like Dick Cheney or George Bush. Like these people's families are probably fine because they're all related to these fucking oil tycoons and whatnot, or they're related to people getting and able to give out contracts. And it becomes like a like nepotism thing. It's like capitalism is feeding so many psychological. It's rewarding. There's another layer on my list here. It's essentially rewarding psychopathic and antisocial behaviors that are destructive and sociopathic to society. Now, I have my own definitions for psychopathy and sociopathy, just based upon the naming of them more so. I'm not a psychologist, but I'm like, actually psychology comes out of philosophy, so I have little grounds to like talk about it. And the way I define psychopathy versus sociopathy is by what they're a pathology of, or like their names imply they are a pathology of. Psychopathy is like a mental, it's a more individual thing. Sociopathy is a wanting to destroy the society. Psychopathy is just like wanting to destroy whatever in service to your like own ego or ends. And usually like they're almost excessively narcissistic and selfish. But I don't know if the person who is under the influence of psychopathy would be able to be conscious that they are acting from narcissism and ego. But that's a whole, like, I'm not gonna go down that rabbit hole. That's another like video. I have to get a guest star who's a specialist in psychology or something. But generally speaking, it's rewarding people who are psychopaths. If you look at people like, perfect example as of today, there's, I think it's the mayor of Las Vegas. She wanted to open up Las Vegas to be control as like their guinea pigs to test whether the social distancing is working or not. And this is not something that would be ethically acceptable within an actual experiment involving humans, let alone within the context of an actual population of a city, like a city of citizens with actual rights and stuff that are supposed to, and like this is like a doctor, like this is like a mad scientist thing. Like this is like super villains. And what's ironic to me, I keep coming back to, because I like comic books and stuff, right, is that we live in a society that worships superheroes on TV screens and on movies and books and other mediums. We worship all sorts of heroes, but like, where are our heroes? Like, we're letting supervillains run our society. Like, not even like it's like when art like it becomes real, and now we are shifting, like the things we used to think would be like hilariously dark jokes are now dark realities, and that's what capitalism is kind of giving us. And I was actually on a tweet with the Dalai Lama because I look at like other people who I think are interesting, and Dalai Lama is interesting. I also Buddhist. I admire and try to embody and borrow from Buddhist philosophy and understanding, because I think it's pretty useful, not merely as a religion, but like as a way of thinking. And the goal of Buddhism is generally, and this is, I try to keep all my Buddhist stuff separate from the political stuff, but I feel like I can borrow some stuff like conceptually from it. The goal of Buddhism is essentially to minimize and or eliminate and transcend suffering, and not just for the individual themselves, especially from like the Mahayana pathway or like the Mahayana perspective, but for in general, just like to minimize, mitigate, eliminate suffering and transcend if possible, and to get beyond your like just this concept of self and attachment to things that are not necessary to be attached to and that generate suffering. So looking at our society, I'm seeing people have an unhealthy attachment to capitalism, and it's like somebody being attached to cancer. Like, why? It's like you have cancer and you don't want to acknowledge that it's cancer or that it's bad for you. It's like you believe it's some kind of like actual, it's like a beauty mark for you or something, and you think it's like making you look great, and it's like doing all these positive things for you. It's like somebody taking I think of what's her name, the woman who discovered DNA. Oh my god, Rosalind Franklin. I think of Rosalind Franklin when she was doing a lot of her research, and she was around like chemical, like she was around radiation, radioactive materials, and these things were unhealthy for her, and she was doing her job. Like she's brilliant, but this is like somebody who has none of her experience dealing with these materials that are dangerous and going to give you cancer if you're not careful with them. And it's like imagining that I was like, oh, this glows, let me wear this on my neck or something like that, not knowing the shit is like radioactive and poison essentially to you. So capitalism is kind of that, except conceptually. And I mean, it can be restricted and controlled in the same way I think that people restrict and control like plutonium or other dangerous materials for powerfully useful and productive ends in restricted sense. But of course, sometimes it's maybe more dangerous than it's worth. That's how I think capitalism needs to be thought of and addressed. Is we need to come to a collective awareness and consciousness of that capitalism is not doing the thing. It's not doing what we need for society, and it's actually not only not doing what we need for society, it's actually degenerating and killing society. It's pitting all these different, not even just different countries. You can look at it just within the United States. It's pitting states. We're supposed to have a common, like, general, like, consensus on what's good, what's bad, and there's just like this series of layered disagreements that are intersecting. Their common thread, one of them is capitalism, but xenophobia maps onto capitalism well, because then you can use the capitalism to justify, it's like a manifest destiny type of thing. I'm rich, partly because I was like, say I'm rich because I'm white or something, right? Because like the history of Euro-Americans enrich themselves by and large off of people of color, like Native Americans, black people, like Chinese built the railroads, all these kind of things, right? And so they had a verifiable and like well-known head start over other groups of people. And so now when we're trying to like say people of color want some of that the resources, and like they want to even the playing field so they can have a just society, these same people that were sort of had an underlying tone of racism have now shifted from using the obviously racist argument that like, well, I'm just white and therefore better, to being like, well, I'm rich and therefore like I work harder than X, Y, or Z person, especially if they're a person of color. And we were shifting, like you can shift back and forth between racism, classism, xenophobia, or just bigotry in general, like, oh, I don't like whatever group of people. And you can be like, oh, from capitalism standpoint, I've seen arguments that you can, oh, well, if they don't adhere to, like, if they don't serve their customers, they want to be racist, just don't eat there and make the, like protest them or something. But it's not that simple. Like, it's really difficult to unseat those and, like, entrenched in power. Like, and this is not a power that was generally accrued over a short period of time, unless you're like Jeff Bezos or somebody, or like somebody like some of these younger, like, rich billionaires. But the common thread being that, and I like, on a meta level, I don't have any beef with anybody who I don't think is a inherent threat to human existence and life on this planet. However, there are people whose very positions just make them the embodiment of a threat to human existence and life on this planet. Billionaires. I wanted to be a billionaire when I was very young, and I still, like, for now, if I had the resources and whatnot, of course I take the power, but that's for the sake of being able to undo the existing system. Because even if I were to live my original dream of being a billionaire, if everything I love and care about, if like elephants go fucking extinct, or like ecosystems collapse, and like we have like all these things that are beautiful or like that are erased from existence, just so I could be a billionaire, would defeat the purpose. It would like almost like turn it to dust in my mouth. So I mean, any power or like whatever it is I try to seek as an individual is ultimately, like, I mean, of course I'm gonna try and live life and make the most of it and have fun, but my life has to be in service to the greater humanity and life on the planet. Most of all, life on the planet, because without life on the planet, without these ecosystems and many of these other things that make our air clean, that like provide food for us, that like shelter us from radiation from the sun and like any number of other things, and help give us medicine, without the rainforests, there is nothing on this planet worth, like, humanity is nothing. It would cease, like, if to achieve just continued existence is the goal of humanity, and not to safeguard and protect what is valuable and existent, like in life, then humans deserve to be wiped out. And I was writing on the Dalai Lama's little on his tweet where he's speaking about the importance of, like, oh, caring about the environment, we have to be human awakening and so on. And I'm not trying to be like a complete downer. I dig where he's coming from. I feel him. I'm like, realistically speaking, the United States, as an American, I can say, are technically, like, not only helping to, or are not only not helping the problem, we are actively making the problem worse, and then selling tickets to the problem. That's what basically said in the tweet. So, have I visited all the points? Essentially, let's go down the list. We need separation of corporation and state. Check. Capitalism is structurally, as a concept, designed to subvert the well-being and interests of society as a whole over time. And that's why it's the key, I think, here is a lot of people will cite, like, things that happen with communism over time, right? But they don't want to cite things that happened in capitalism and that are still happening over capitalism. People are starving because of capitalism. People are at war because and it's not only capitalism, but the problem is capitalism is a major factor that's binding these binds a lot of these problems together. And that if we could just tackle that, we could get so much more done and evolve as a species, and be maybe gardeners of the earth instead of a fucking plague of locusts that are feeding off of and just wiping it out en masse until all the food's gone. Our societies are plunged into, like, war with each other, and we have a fucking biological, it's like a population collapse essentially. And that's assuming we like don't have some kind of natural disaster on top of like what we have now, like the coronavirus, that just necessarily collapses our society, because money and resources that should have been devoted to social safety nets and to like creating solutions to problems before they form is being diverted to feed these super, like the greed of super rich billionaires and politicians and people who do not have the common good in mind. And it might be, it doesn't matter whether you want to think of them as being actively evil, like they're consciously doing this. I'm pretty sure Mitch McConnell from Kentucky is actively doing evil. Like he's aware that this is bad, and he's just doubling down. But there's other people who are just like, I may be like genuine stupidness or stupidity and ignorance, which are even more dangerous than active, willful evil. These people will be guided like sheep into the slaughter. Like it's absurd. And not only will they be guided like sheep to the slaughter, but they're cheering on the people about to slaughter them. And it like, from a slightly more selfish standpoint, if it was just them, if it was only going to affect the stupid people, then it would not be a problem as much for like society. Humans would survive, like nature would survive more or less. But stupid people are a threat to not only themselves, but everybody else. And they're easily used as tools by these people in power as like pawns to be like cast aside. And so this stuff is not a joke. I'm very positive. Like, there's a lot of things I'm not certain about in life, but this is one of those things I'm pretty near certain is the case about capitalism from what I've personally experienced and seen amongst my friends and people. I've seen brilliant people come and go and fall and die, and like all sorts of things happen. I've read about in history happening and learned about. And to see people still like, I mean, there are some people who get it. I've been following more recently, like Richard Wolff, I think, follows it. Some of the other economists I follow are like Anwar Sheikh, Stephanie Kelton, who else is awesome? Anand Giridharadas, and Robert Reich is more recently, I think, been more on the nose about it, because before I felt like he was holding back in 2016. Then 2020, I felt like he was full in with Bernie Sanders' team, who was like the perfect candidate. And you know why he didn't win? Because 61 plus billionaires and a lot of people with money and resources felt like he was too dangerous to allow to run, even though he was right. Like, and you're going like if the short-term proof that Bernie Sanders was right is the coronavirus, but the long term is going to be even more painful for society. And it's just tragic to see like American, like all the potential America has to create a Star Trek-like future is being like not only wasted, like trounced upon. And so we've gone on. Separation of corporation and state needs to be the new rule of the day. We need to be working towards. Capitalism creates hierarchy and division, and also it creates psychological pathology. And it's not just on its own typically, but it doesn't take much for it to be able to morph into these more toxic forms over time and subvert like ordinary empathy and reason. So yeah, I've touched on warping reason. It also rewards psychopathy and encourages sociopathy. It rewards people who are basically don't give a fuck about other human beings and don't have empathy, because it makes they're more successful because they can like push people under the bus so that they can get ahead. And then sociopaths are formed because our society becomes increasingly toxic. If you watch the Joker movie, the new Joker movie from I think 2019 does a very good job of highlighting how society can become so toxic that it forms like psychopathy or sociopathy. Just becomes sociopaths. Why do these people shoot up school? Why do people like want to do crazy things to hurt people? Because society has put them in such pain and psychologically tortured them. I mean, of course, there are some examples that are maybe outliers or like maybe exceptions to the rule. But by and large, these people are missing the the mental health care that they should have. They shouldn't be being put in a position where they can even reach these ultimate ends that they achieve. And our society just makes it it makes it easy for them to not only form and have a school shooting or something, but it makes it accessible and almost like it becomes the alternate pathway to rather than having to deal with the problem. So there's that. And then it's inefficient. It wastes resources. It draws resources from meaningful ends for humanity and moving forward as a society. We get new technologies and stuff, yes. We have like advances, but that's not only because of capitalism. Actually, a lot of it comes out of public universities like UCI, but which are paid for by tax dollars in the socialist manner. But it just wastes a lot of resources. And we could, like, if enough people just were conscious of how toxic this is and would be willing to be humble and acknowledge, yes, this is fucked up. We need to stop this. Let's switch over to I think the shift to socialism, democratic or whatever else we want to call it, is necessary because we need to get our minds off of capitalism being the rule of the day. So I know, oh my god, this is like the longest video I might have ever created, but it was necessary to go through like the 100 flaws of capital. What do you want to call it? Like there's like a Chinese saying that I thought was pretty cool, like the 100 flaws of Chen or something like that. But it's something like that. It's just like these are like the sins of capitalism, and they will continue to perpetuate themselves as long as we are subscribing to capitalism as a system. So let's stop doing that. Can we please? Maybe? And the last point I had was capitalism kills. Hashtag capitalism kills. And I encourage everybody who is, if you ever see anything online that like is a news article about like essentially how the economic system is screwing over people, hashtag capitalism kills for me, because that's what I do. It's a little thing, but I think over time, if enough people do it, it'll start to catch on. And yeah, it breeds corruption because, of course, it's rewarding psychopaths and sociopaths. It's creating sociopathy and it's rewarding psychopathy. So, of course, like without the government to intervene, and it tries to increasingly deregulate things so that the government cannot intervene, then of course corruption, like nepotism, conflicts of interest, and the president of the United States, Donald Trump, is the perfect example of conflicts of interest, corruption. Like, he should have been impeached. He's doing impeachable offenses as we speak, and yet, because his party is the party in power in Senate, and also we have enough neoliberals in Congress that are not not feeling like it's worthy to pursue another impeachment, I guess, or I don't know what they're doing anymore, but they're not doing enough. And this is not only their failure, it's a failure on our part because we're not making them do enough. They aren't afraid of us. They don't give a fuck. They're comfortable. So yeah, make them uncomfortable. Like whatever you have to do. Like if you see them in society or if you see them outside, like make them feel bad. Like that's the least you can do. Like scowl at them, like call them names, like whatever you have to do to make them social outcasts so they understand that they're like the enemies of the people and society at large. Like yeah, within reason. Then so yeah, I'm gonna end on the theory, my trying to like form my understanding of economics and the framework of ecology. And rather than, a lot of people I feel like have always looked at economics in terms of like a machine, and it's like a clock or something, like, oh, if I just tune it just right, or I've put in the right calculations here, X, Y, and Z, and I'll for sure get like this mechanical consistent processing. And I don't feel like that's how it operates. And I'm not a specialist in economics, but economics is actually like I don't want to say pseudoscience, but it's like, it's not a hard science. It's not physics. It's not, there, a lot of things are like not as dogmatic as people want to believe that they are. And we can change a lot of things, just people don't even want to fucking try to change things. They don't want to give a new idea a chance. So yeah, again, in conclusion, the goal of capitalism is and only is profit and to generate more capital. And there are increasingly no rules by which are required to achieve this end. Like, I'm going to end because it's already at 50 minutes. I'm going to go. But I hope I have done a decent job of helping to get you to think about what capitalism is and why it's a problem. And I'm going to work on giving you responses on or pointing in direction of solutions in another video. But for now, you have to understand what this is and what I'm seeing in order to see ways that we can maybe try and fix the problem. And we can't call it capitalism. Society cannot run as the zeitgeist. The zeitgeist can no longer accept capitalism as the system by which we organize our society, our government, and our economy. It can be a fragment or a tool within the economy and within society, but by and large, I differentiate it this way, and I'll use this for later videos as well. If you're selling strawberries or ice cream or something, you can do your free market. You can do your capitalism thing, but if it's stuff that people need to survive, like vaccines or healthcare or housing or education, and that are goods in and of themselves for society, they should not be a for-profit thing. It's not profitable to save the world, but it is profitable if you understand true value of things. And I'm trying to write something that's essentially getting at what we mean. Why do we work? Why do we how are we coming up with these sense of value for things? And this is not a new thing, but I wanted to do it myself as I'm living in this era, so let me contribute what I can to the solution to the problems. So with all that said, I'm gonna still work on that. I got some pages of it down, but it's a work in progress, and I don't know if I'll be able to finish it. It's I had all this time to work on it, and I feel ashamed of myself for not having the self-discipline to complete it as much as I would have liked, but it's more than nothing, thankfully. That being the case, yeah, I think I've done a good job. Oh, I didn't really touch on this. I'm going to touch on this very briefly. Additionally, capitalism, because it's going to seek to deregulate and break the balance of power over time, it's also going to assail privacy and civil liberties. It's also going to assail healthcare, because they want to privatize healthcare, want to privatize the post office, they want to privatize whatever they can fucking privatize because they can find a way to make money off of it. And usually the lobbyists for these people will pay them and reward them in some way, shape, or form. So again, conflicts of interest, but we can't correct that without the problems have to be solved in a Tetris sort of fashion. If you solve one problem but other ones stack up, you've lost the game. And so you have to stack up just the right problems in the right order and pattern in order to stay in the game. And I'll get on that on another video. But yeah, if you care about social safety nets and you think they're not terrible, or you care about healthcare and don't want to die or worry about being bankrupted from getting sick or breaking something or taking an ambulance for some reason, or if you care about privacy and civil liberties and don't want to be at risk of being framed for something that you didn't do, or being blackmailed, I guess, or whatever number of things you could, there's lots of ways you can corrupt or misuse power. So that's why we had civil liberties, and if we get rid of them, it's going to be really bad. On that end, happy Earth Day. I don't know if it's still Earth Day right now, but every day should be Earth Day. So I hope that this has made you think, and that's all I can ask. And yeah, I'm going to end on that note. Thank you for your time, and let's keep this up and keep trying to fight. This is my effort to try and get my ideas and stuff out there and link up with other people and get everybody to think again. Make America think again. Peace. All right, peace out.